At 5:47 in the morning, I was already awake, staring at my laptop screen with the kind of exhaustion that coffee can't fix anymore. The deployment tracker was flashing red again, another overnight failure that somehow nobody else seemed to notice until I fixed it. My phone buzzed with the fourth missed call from the infrastructure team. I let it ring out. I'd learned that lesson the hard way over my 14 years at Meridian Tech. Never answer before you've had your first cup. Not anymore. Not after spending more than a decade being the invisible force that kept everything running, the one who made sure the quarterly investor reports actually generated on time, the one who prevented some overeager project lead from accidentally wiping out customer data by scheduling updates during peak traffic hours. They called me indispensable, but always in that tone that sounded more like resentment than gratitude. Not a single database, not a single automated process, not a single critical system in that entire company ran without touching the infrastructure I designed and built from the ground up in those early startup days, back when we were 20 people working out of a converted warehouse. I didn't just write code, I architected the nervous system, and like most nervous systems, nobody pays attention until something stops working. The newer employees didn't understand that. To them, I was just Valerie, the senior architect who'd been around forever, which is corporate speak for the older woman who knows too much and talks too little. The new chief technology officer, Brandon, yes, Brandon, because apparently that's the only name tech executives come with these days, he barely acknowledged me during his first company-wide meeting, called me Victoria twice, suggested I should probably start documenting my work before they transitioned to a more modern cloud infrastructure. I smiled, didn't correct him, didn't react, just made a mental note. March 15th. Brandon's education begins, and if you've made it this far, I want to say something. This is Revenge Stories with Michelle, a home for quiet courage and true endings. If you feel my words, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your voice matters here. Your story matters too. Back to me, Valerie Chen, who had spent 14 years mastering the art of being essential without being visible. I didn't wear designer clothes to impress anyone. I didn't post thought leadership articles or give TED-style talks at conferences. I just showed up, fixed what was broken before anyone knew it was breaking, and left at exactly 5:15 unless there was a genuine emergency. And there had been one emergency, a server room fire, and I'd stayed to make sure the backup systems were properly documented before evacuating. My desk was tucked away on the fourth floor in a corner near the stairs that hardly anyone used, right underneath a fluorescent light that flickered constantly and had been on the facilities repair list for 2 years. Most days I could work for 7 hours without a single person stopping by my desk, which suited me perfectly. It's easier to maintain the entire digital infrastructure when people forget you're the one maintaining it. That's what they all missed when they passed me over for the principal architect position 18 months ago. Some newly minted PhD from MIT with a Kubernetes tattoo and an obsession with microservices got the role instead. I even trained him for 3 excruciating months while he kept calling me wickedly smart and asked if I could translate my legacy systems into something more contemporary. I translated them all right, straight into a secure backup drive labeled Project Phoenix that I quietly archived the day his onboarding was complete. I didn't complain, I didn't make a scene. What would have been the point? You speak up and you're emotional, you stay silent and you're not a team player. I'd been in this industry long enough to know there was no winning that game. The only real move was knowing when to hold your cards and when to walk away from the table entirely. But I wasn't there yet, not at that moment. Back then, I still held on to this naive belief in meritocracy that maybe, just maybe, someone would notice that the deployment pipelines, the automated testing suites, the customer data backups, the payment processing workflows, they were all still running on the architecture I'd built with my own hands, but nobody asked. They just assumed someone somewhere had modernized everything because that's what the glossy roadmap presentations claimed. I used to correct them, used to remind people in meetings that the core infrastructure was custom built, tightly integrated, and entirely dependent on access permissions that only I controlled. But somewhere around the 7th reorganization and the 15th company rebrand, I stopped bothering. Let them believe what they wanted to believe. After all, I hadn't removed myself from the system, just from their attention. And the moment I realized that, the moment I understood that my invisibility wasn't a weakness but a strategic advantage, that's when the countdown started for every arrogant executive who thought they actually ran the company. I didn't need fancy titles. I had access, and not the kind you could revoke with a simple HR ticket. It was supposed to be a quick alignment meeting, 30 minutes maximum, just me, Brandon, the CTO, a video call full of nodding heads, and a slide deck drowning in buzzwords like agile transformation and infrastructure optimization. Brandon, whose MBA from some overpriced business school had clearly skipped the section on humility, was presenting yet another cost-cutting initiative. This one involved streamlining redundancy in our core automation systems, the ones that kept our multi-million-dollar operations from imploding every quarter. I let him talk, let him gesture at his slides with that laser pointer he loved so much. Let him say things like legacy dependencies, like he had any clue what was actually running underneath those pretty dashboards he stared at every morning. Then, in my usual measured tone, I said exactly 4 sentences. If you remove the redundancy layers, you eliminate the safety buffer during high traffic periods. That will cascade into our compliance reporting systems. Our regulatory deadlines don't care about your budget priorities. You're trading stability for short-term savings. The silence that followed was thick. Not uncomfortable, just dense, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see who'd speak next. Brandon didn't speak, he smirked. And then came the message that would become legendary in the company's history, though nobody would ever talk about it openly. It arrived at 11:43 that night, a direct message on Slack. Fix your tone or forget your $180,000 retention bonus, sent with the casual cruelty of someone who thought sending threats late at night made them powerful instead of pathetic. I didn't respond with anger. I didn't tell him exactly where he could shove his retention bonus. I just typed one word. Acknowledged. Not okay, not understood, just acknowledged. Like I was confirming receipt of a package, like I was logging information before initiating a shutdown sequence. I set my phone down, opened my secure terminal, and started backing up my access logs. Not because I was worried, not because I had anything to hide, just because I knew exactly where this path was leading, and I was already 10 steps ahead. No theatrics, no emotional outbursts, just documentation. People always underestimate the quiet ones. The ones who don't make speeches, the ones who don't give you a chance to disrespect them twice because you never noticed the first time landing. I wasn't passive, I was calculating. And if Brandon had paid even the smallest amount of attention during his first month at the company, he might have noticed that the entire company's core infrastructure was still running under a single set of administrative credentials. Mine? Sure, there were surface-level dashboards. Sure, a few teams thought they had oversight, but oversight isn't ownership. Oversight is a comfortable illusion, and I had never transferred root access because nobody had ever asked me to. Why would they? I always showed up, always fixed everything, always stayed late when needed, always bled quietly into the network while everyone else went home. Now I was done bleeding. I documented every system tied to my credentials, set expiration dates on authentication tokens, exported complete architecture diagrams to an encrypted drive, and just for my own amusement, I highlighted every executive level override that had quietly failed over to my backup systems in the past 4 years. There were 43. One had prevented a $7.2 million data loss during a vendor migration. Did anyone thank me? Number. They sent me a gift card to a coffee shop. It expired unused. Brandon probably thought he'd issued a warning, maybe even a threat. What he didn't realize, what he couldn't possibly realize, was that I had already survived 6 versions of him. Different faces, same arrogance, same condescension, same addiction to management buzzwords and performance theater, but none of them had ever been stupid enough to threaten my bonus in writing. None of them had ever said the quiet part, that loudly. I closed my laptop and looked around my apartment. The soft blue glow of my monitors reflected off the framed certificate on my wall, Employee Excellence Award from 2019, signed by a CEO who'd since been fired for financial misconduct. It was all so absurd, so small. They'd spent 14 years relying on me, and the first time I questioned a bad decision, they dangled my livelihood like bait. Well, I hoped Brandon liked fishing because by tomorrow morning, the systems he thought he understood would start throwing errors like a malfunctioning slot machine, and I would be unreachable. The kind of unreachable where you don't answer emails, the kind where your name keeps appearing in system logs while everything falls apart, the kind where acknowledged was the last word they heard before the silence started screaming. At 2:33 in the morning, with my apartment bathed in that sickly glow that only comes from too many monitors and a microwave clock that's been blinking 12 o'clock for 6 months, I sat back and stared at the most boring interface in corporate technology, the root access management console. It was a digital crypt, a forgotten corner of our infrastructure, buried so deep that even the security team didn't look at it unless legally required. But I wasn't here to admire it. I was here to verify something that had been nagging at me since Brandon's little power play. Had anyone at all, ever reassigned primary ownership of the core systems? I clicked through the authentication hierarchy, entered my master access credentials, still active, still valid, still God-level permissions. A moment later, the entire access matrix loaded on my screen. Every row was a system. Every column was a permission level. It was beautiful in a bleak corporate way, silent, stable, and completely ignored. There it was, line 147. The Core Infrastructure Suite, internally labeled VCS Prime, created by Valerie C. Chen on June 3, 2011. Owner VC Chen. Privileges, full administrative control, system-wide override authority, succession planning, not assigned, not assigned. I stared at those two words, not assigned. Then I laughed, just once, quietly. The kind of laugh you make when you realize the house you built has been claimed by people who never bothered to check who held the deed. The laugh of someone who knows the storm is coming, but also knows exactly where every emergency exit is located. They'd built their entire operation on top of my architecture, product launches, customer databases, financial reporting, automated compliance checks, even the cheerful Monday morning motivational emails that pinged the company's Slack channel like clockwork. All of it relied on infrastructure that was still tied to an account belonging to a woman whose bonus had been threatened by a man who wore sneakers to board meetings and said things like, "Let's ideate on that. I didn't change anything. That's important. I didn't modify permissions. I didn't delete anything. I didn't sabotage a single line of code. I just looked like a homeowner reviewing security footage after noticing someone's been trying the door handle at night. Then I opened a notebook, an actual physical notebook with a leather cover, gifted to me years ago by a product manager who'd quit to become a yoga instructor in Bali. Page 1, ownership verification, VCS Prime Current Administrator, VC Chen. Last system access, March 13th, 2025 at 10:27 p.m. Succession planning status, not assigned. I wrote it all down in clean, precise handwriting. No emotion, no editorializing, just facts. I understood now what Brandon had really done. He hadn't just threatened my bonus. He'd invited me to confirm something I'd suspected since the day he strutted in with his transformation roadmap, and a whiteboard full of acronyms he couldn't define. He thought the infrastructure had been modernized. He assumed it had been migrated, updated, handed off to a proper engineering team, but nobody ever migrated it because it worked, because I never let it fail, because preventing disasters doesn't make the quarterly highlight reel, because when you're good at making emergencies not happen, people forget there was ever any danger in the first place. I leaned back and turned to page 2. Impact assessment. Automated processes, 847 active. Mission-critical systems, 68%. Compliance reporting tied to primary authentication. Backup failover systems disabled per Q4 cost reduction initiative. That last one made me shake my head. They really had disabled the backup systems to save money. I'd warned them. I'd written an entire report about it, presented it in a meeting. Brandon had thanked me for the analysis and then immediately ignored every recommendation. Filed it under acknowledged concerns, non-urgent action items. A strategic calm settled over me, the kind of calm that comes right before you make a decision you can't take back. I wasn't angry, I wasn't bitter, I was just awake. Like that moment in a thriller when the protagonist stops running and starts planning. There were people I could have called, engineers who still respected me, colleagues who would have listened, but I didn't call them because I wasn't raising an alarm. Not yet. I simply closed the notebook, backed up my access credentials to an encrypted drive labeled insurance policy, and shut down my laptop. The apartment was quiet, so were the systems, but I knew the clock had already started ticking. And nobody, not legal, not Brandon, not the security team with their penetration testing reports, nobody was watching the countdown. It started with a hiccup, barely a blip in the morning system logs. At 6:17 a.m., a small but critical automated job failed to execute. Nothing dramatic, just a scheduled compliance export meant to send anonymized customer data to our largest international client, a task that, according to contract, had to run daily or trigger penalty fees. Brandon never read contracts. He thought penalty clauses were just legal boilerplate. I knew better. I'd helped negotiate them. By 6:34, the payroll processing system threw a warning, one of those wonderfully vague error messages that says authentication object not found in a font designed to inspire quiet panic. Nobody noticed at first. The early morning crew was busy preparing for a strategy meeting Brandon had called, something about aligning our second quarter objectives with stakeholder expectations. My name was still on the meeting invite. I'd declined it 3 days earlier with a simple message taking a personal day with a smiley face emoji. That same smiley face would later be screenshot and analyzed by legal during the investigation. By 8:23 a.m., a junior engineer named Marcus posted a question in the infrastructure Slack channel. Hey, does anyone know why the job scheduler logs are showing no administrator assigned? Is that normal? Nobody replied for 16 minutes. When someone finally did, it was Brandon in classic form, tagging the wrong person. At Sandra, hey, can you loop in the ops team? This is probably just a permissions refresh, nothing urgent. The irony being, there was no Sandra on the ops team. There was a Sandra in marketing who hadn't logged in since going on medical leave in February. Meanwhile, another team discovered that their deployment pipeline was stuck in a pending state, a safety lock that hadn't existed in the system for over a year. It was a ghost protocol I'd coded during a vendor crisis 3 years ago, designed to activate only if the primary administrator account went inactive or was reassigned without proper authorization. It was never supposed to trigger, not unless something was fundamentally broken. And yet there it was, frozen, silent, blinking like a digital stop sign. Slack threads multiplied like rabbits. People started resurrecting old conversations. Engineers opened tickets marked critical with red flags everywhere. Tickets that were automatically routed to me by the system, a system I'd configured years ago and that nobody had ever bothered to update. Each one bounced back with the same auto response, currently out of office. For infrastructure emergencies, please consult system documentation. There was no system documentation. Not the real kind. Not the kind that explained the hidden failsafes or the buried authentication chains, or why everything from HR automation to legal compliance reporting somehow still pinged an administrator account labeled VCS Prime. Marcus messaged his team lead again. I checked the metadata. The administrator field literally says null like not empty null. Can a system even function like that? No response. At 9:14, a quality assurance analyst manually triggered a batch job, something that was supposed to auto-execute at 7 a.m. It hung for 5 minutes, then crashed. The log file it left behind contained a single comment I'd written in 2018. If you are reading this, it means someone made a terrible decision. Someone on the team laughed when they saw it, nervously, the kind of laugh that sounds like a cough. By 9:48, the finance department called Brandon's office directly. 4 wire transfers hadn't cleared. One of them exceeded an internal threshold limit I'd hard-coded after an executive accidentally sent $63,000 to a catering vendor for a lunch that never happened. Brandon, mid-cappuccino, waved it off. It's just a legacy glitch, have ops rerun the jobs. Ops tried, ops failed. One engineer attempted to manually bypass the system through a secondary automation server, only to discover that the job was locked behind deprecated credentials that belonged to me. By lunchtime, panic had been officially launched, though nobody wanted to call it that yet. Not a crisis, just concern, just confusion, just systems behaving like rebellious teenagers, ignoring commands, breaking workflows, deleting nothing but stopping everything. And through it all, I said nothing. I was, according to every record, on a personal day, the kind of day where you turn off notifications and ignore your phone. I wasn't watching them scramble in real time, not actively, but I had set up a passive monitoring script years ago, one that pinged me when systems I'd built went dormant. It had pinged at exactly 6:17 a.m. I'd glanced at it once, smiled quietly to myself, the kind of smile that doesn't show teeth, and then I went back to reading my book. They were learning now, slowly, painfully, that control isn't always loud, that real power doesn't announce itself in meetings or shout over video calls. Real power is knowing that when you stop holding something up, everyone finally notices how heavy it actually is. The ticket was created at 10:56 a.m. with the ominous but vague title, Infrastructure Scheduler Critical Issue Urgent Review. Nobody wanted to create it. Nobody wanted to own it. It sat unassigned for 19 minutes until Marcus from engineering finally claimed it with all the enthusiasm of someone adopting a feral cat. The first thing he did was run a standard diagnostic trace, just a basic health check. Instead, he got a cascade of red alerts, deprecated dependencies, expired security certificates, scripts running on software versions that hadn't been supported since 2 administrations ago. The core scheduler, the absolute heart of the infrastructure, hadn't been updated in 512 days. No code commits, no access logs from anyone except one user, VC Chen. Me. I hadn't touched the system in over 7 months, and yet my credentials were still the only ones with full administrative access. The rest of the engineering team had read-only visibility through mirrored dashboards that hadn't properly synced since last quarter. Marcus blinked at his screen, scrolled through the logs twice, then leaned back so hard his chair nearly tipped over. He immediately escalated the ticket to the security team and copied legal just in case. 3 floors up, Brandon was knee-deep in a leadership meeting where he was trying to reframe the word crisis into learning opportunity. His voice carried through the glass conference room walls with that forced confidence unique to executives who've never actually built anything. A nervous product manager had just informed him that the client-facing analytics dashboard had failed to load this morning's data, another casualty of the scheduler's midnight processing freeze. Brandon waved it off with his usual dismissiveness. That's an ops issue. We'll have it patched by end of day. But when Marcus dropped his findings into the engineering Slack channel, one line in particular, bold and blinking like a hazard light, Brandon's voice faltered mid-sentence. Primary Administrator VC Chen, no succession assignment on file. The channel went silent. Then someone, an intern who didn't realize he was in the wrong thread, posted a popcorn emoji. It was deleted 30 seconds later, but the screenshot lived forever. Brandon messaged HR through a private back channel. Begin documenting performance concerns. We may need to build a case negligence failure to transfer critical systems, whatever applies. It was the digital equivalent of grabbing a life raft while the ship was actively sinking. HR, ever the obedient bureaucrat, opened a file on Valerie Chen for failure to properly transition infrastructure ownership. Never mind that nobody had ever asked me to transition anything. Never mind that every quarterly planning document, every sprint retrospective, every platform modernization proposal had conveniently skipped over the part where you migrate the one system holding the entire operation together. I had warned them, not loudly, not dramatically, just repeatedly. In emails nobody read, in ticket comments nobody acknowledged. In architecture review meetings where I was consistently scheduled last and cut short when people wanted to leave early for drinks. So when HR sent me a friendly message, hey, would you have time for a quick call to discuss some infrastructure documentation? Just want to clarify a few things. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The dominoes were already falling. Legal's formal request for system access logs went out at 11:42 a.m. The security team complied within 9 minutes. The resulting spreadsheet looked like something from a conspiracy thriller. Every critical process, every high-stakes automated job, every emergency failover system, all tied to my user ID. They even found a comment I'd left in one of the shell scripts 2 years ago. If this still points to me, it means nobody did their job. Good luck, future problem solvers. The lawyer reading it nearly choked on his green tea. Is this admissible? He asked. Nobody in particular. Depends on who's suing whom, someone muttered back. Meanwhile, inside Brandon's corner office, all glass and steel and decorated like a tech magazine photo shoot, he was pacing like a caged animal, eyes bouncing between his laptop and his phone and the spreadsheet Legal had shared in a panic. His hand hovered over his phone, thumb twitching like he wanted to call me personally, but couldn't quite bring himself to do it, because calling me meant admitting I'd built something he didn't understand, something he couldn't control. And Brandon, man of slide decks and LinkedIn humble brags, did not lose control. So instead he called HR again. Can we revoke her system access? He asked. Technically came the careful reply, but she still holds primary credentials. Revoking her access could make things significantly worse. How much worse, we're still assessing, but preliminary analysis suggests severe dependency issues. He hung up without saying goodbye. Across the city, I sat in my same chair, same hoodie, same quiet apartment. No music, no distractions, just the occasional chirp of email notifications that I ignored completely. I was watching now, not interfering, just observing, witnessing the structure buckle under the weight of its own arrogance. Because here's the thing about building something nobody else understands. They don't know how to fix it when it breaks. But you know exactly where every crack will spread. You know exactly how long it takes before they start begging. At exactly 8:14 a.m. the next morning, the silence shattered. Not with explosions, not with sparks or smoke, but with a single sterile error message flashing across the central operations dashboard in a shade of red that looked less like a warning and more like a death certificate. Access denied, credential invalid system administrator not recognized. The infrastructure didn't crash. It simply stopped, like an engine that calmly refuses to start, like a door that locks from the inside, while everyone's still standing on the porch, wondering what happened. In payroll, the morning processing job froze mid-execution. Salaries for 1,400 employees just hung there, suspended. In compliance, the automated audit package failed to generate for our primary financial regulator, a report tied to executive bonuses and the company's public filing schedule. The data was ready, the templates were loaded, the job was queued, but the heartbeat was gone. The scheduler didn't malfunction, it didn't corrupt data or throw random errors, it simply refused to verify administrator credentials. And in doing so, it followed the one rule I'd written into its core logic years ago. If the administrator session expires, do nothing, not even log an error. At 8:17, messages started flooding in, not from engineers, but from finance, always the first department to notice when money stops moving, accountants whose entire existence revolves around deadlines, and who understand that delays mean fees, penalties, and very angry people in very expensive suits. Operations chimed in next. Their deployment tracker wouldn't load, stuck in an infinite loop, trying to authenticate against a system that was technically still running, but now sealed off like a vault with no combination. Brandon was in a strategic planning call with external investors when his phone started vibrating across the table like it was possessed. He ignored the first few messages. When his assistant physically entered the room, pale and breathless, and said legal is in full emergency mode, he finally muted his microphone. "What now?" he said with that exasperated tone executives use when they're pretending to be calm. She didn't answer with words. She just turned his laptop toward him. On screen, 6 different terminal windows all showed the same status. Administrator not recognized, job terminated, administrator VC Chen. He stared at my name on the screen. It might as well have been written in blood or fire. At that exact moment, in a legal conference call already in progress with compliance auditors and an external risk consultant, the company's general counsel went completely silent mid-sentence. They were reviewing the annual audit checklist, routine procedure, until someone asked about the automation system ownership. Who currently administers the core infrastructure scheduler? The auditor asked casually, like she was asking about office supplies. The silence that followed was absolute. Then a single voice, the junior compliance officer named Priya, offered a shaky response. "I believe it's still registered under Valerie Chen's credentials." The head of legal, mid-sip of his 3rd coffee of the morning, stood up so abruptly his chair screeched across the floor and toppled backward. "Please tell me she doesn't own the scheduler," he said to the room at large. Nobody answered because everyone in that room knew the truth. Back in the engineering war room, team members were frantically searching through permission logs. The evidence was undeniable. My user ID hadn't been accessed since 11:39 p.m. 2 nights ago. There was no trace of sabotage, no deletions, no malicious commands, just absence, a clean cessation of activity. One engineer scrolling through the changelog pointed to a comment in the last major update I'd pushed. "Administrator session verification 48-hour timeout if expired. Suspend all automated tasks. Do not fail over. Not sabotage, not an attack, a safeguard. A digital do not resuscitate order, written by the very person they dismissed, undervalued, and shoved to the margins." At 8:34, clients started emailing. The compliance report hadn't been delivered. One of them, a major European partner, threatened to escalate to their legal team if they didn't receive a valid explanation within the hour. At 8:49, HR, still working on that disciplinary documentation against me, received new orders from legal. Locate Valerie Chen, immediately get her on a call. Do not issue warnings, do not escalate, do not make threats. Brandon tried calling me directly, 1 ring, 2 rings, straight to voicemail. My out-of-office message hadn't changed. Currently unavailable and not monitoring messages if this is urgent. It probably wasn't architected correctly in the first place. By 9 a.m., nobody was pretending anymore. The morning all-hands meeting was canceled. Engineers stopped pushing code. Product managers quietly archived their roadmaps like it would somehow undo the damage. And me, I was sitting at home, sipping tea, the expensive kind I rarely bought for myself, watching sunlight stream through my window and across the notebook on my desk, the one with every system I'd ever built, every handoff they'd never completed, every warning they'd never heeded. At 9:16, I opened my email. A new message sat at the top, subject urgent consultation request from Office of General Counsel. Body, we would appreciate the opportunity to discuss a restoration pathway at your earliest convenience. Please advise on your availability. I didn't reply. Not yet. The silence was still speaking louder than I ever could. The word sabotage had been floating around like smoke for the past 4 hours, mostly thrown around by executives desperately trying to reframe their own negligence as someone else's malice. Brandon said it first, predictably, at 9:03 a.m. during an emergency call with legal. She shut it down. She must have pulled the access logs, contact security. This is a deliberate attack. By 10:31, the full forensic audit report was complete, and it read like a confession, just not the kind Brandon wanted. I hadn't touched the infrastructure in nearly 52 hours. No deletions, no permission changes, no command line actions. I hadn't modified a single line of code. The scheduler had simply failed to verify an active administrator session. That was it. I hadn't torn down the system. I just stepped away from it and let them realize nobody else knew how to keep it running. The security team's findings were presented on a hastily organized video conference call. On screen were 3 color-coded blocks representing critical infrastructure nodes, each one labeled orphaned, no administrator assigned. The external consultant, a woman who'd probably seen this exact scenario a dozen times before, squinted at the screen. Wait, your core infrastructure was still using session-based verification, she asked. The chief technology officer nodded stiffly. Yes, legacy architecture. We've been planning to modernize it. The consultant scrolled through more data. Why wasn't there a backup administrator assigned? She asked. Silence. Why didn't anyone migrate the access permissions? Another beat of silence. She looked up from her laptop. You understand, this isn't a security breach. This isn't even a system failure. This is... She paused, searching for the right words. This is exactly what the system was designed to do. The call went silent in that uniquely uncomfortable way that only happens when a room full of high-paid executives realizes they've been caught completely unprepared. But it wasn't because anyone's connection dropped. It was just the collective sound of people processing the fact that I hadn't sabotaged anything. I'd just walked away and closed the door behind me. At 10:58, legal issued an internal statement carefully worded like a press release, meant to avoid lawsuits. Preliminary forensic analysis confirms no malicious activity system. Access lapsed due to inactivity on sole administrator. Credential restoration of services requires credential reactivation and cooperation from primary account holder. They didn't use my name. They didn't need to. Everyone knew. The CTO was the first person to say it out loud during a leadership meeting that was supposed to be about damage control. We're completely dead in the water without her, he said quietly. HR, still reeling from their attempt to build a disciplinary case against me just one day earlier, quietly deleted the draft and changed my employee status from under review to active awaiting resolution. Brandon, meanwhile, was holed up in his office, watching his career unravel in real time like a sweater caught on a nail. His phone sat face down on the desk, screen shattered from where he'd thrown it against the wall after the compliance officer muttered, "You let the only person with root access walk away," threatened. At 11:19, another report landed, this one from Enterprise Risk Management. It outlined 2 options. Option A, obtain credential restoration from Valerie Chen, estimated recovery time 4 hours, estimated cost to be determined subject to negotiation. Option B, rebuild infrastructure from scratch, estimated recovery time 8 to 14 weeks, estimated cost $1.6 to $2, $8 million plus contract penalties, vendor breaches, and reputational damage. Brandon read it 3 times, then circled option A with a red pen, then poured himself whiskey from the bottle he kept in a commemorative company mug from 2019. Across the city, I was folding laundry. I wasn't celebrating. I wasn't glued to a screen watching them panic in real time. My email was closed. My phone was on silent. My only notification came from that old passive monitoring script I'd written years ago, the one that pinged me when systems I'd built went into dormant mode. It had pinged at exactly 8:14 a.m. I'd glanced at it once, smiled to myself, the kind of smile that sits quietly in the corner of your mouth like the edge of a knife, and then I'd gone back to my normal morning. They were learning now, slowly, painfully, that control isn't loud, that real power doesn't perform in meetings or dominate conference calls. Real power is knowing that if you stop holding something together, everyone finally realizes how much weight you were carrying all along. At 7:31 the next morning, a sleek black car pulled up outside my apartment building. No company logos, no flashing lights, just one of those luxury sedans that law firms rent when they're trying to look serious without looking desperate. A woman in a gray suit stepped out, heels clicking on the pavement, clutching a leather portfolio that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She didn't knock on my door. She didn't even make it to the front steps. The door stayed closed. I had already made my move 16 hours earlier. I'd opened my laptop, navigated to my encrypted drive, and drafted a document with the most boring title imaginable: Infrastructure Restoration Agreement, Fee C Chen. The tone was cold, surgical, unmistakably final. It wasn't a request, it wasn't a negotiation, it was a rescue bill. The email I sent to the senior legal partner included no pleasantries, no hope this finds you well, no corporate niceties, just the contract attached as a PDF. Subject line terms valid until 12 p.m. today. The terms were explicit and non negotiable. Full restoration of all withheld compensation, including the $180,000 retention bonus previously threatened, plus damages for hostile work environment, documented retaliation, and systemic negligence. A formal written apology addressed to Valerie Chen from executive leadership, acknowledging misconduct by senior management, to be filed in my permanent employee record and disclosed to the board. Limited consulting engagement, 6 months maximum with defined working hours, no on-call expectations, and zero non-compete restrictions. Consulting fee $1.5 million, paid upfront, no payment plans. And my final clause: upon completion of system restoration, all administrative access tied to VC Chen credentials will be permanently revoked by me personally, after which I will have no further obligation to this organization. The email ended with one line: if these terms are unacceptable, please proceed with your infrastructure rebuild. You will find your timeline estimates optimistic. By 8:19 a.m., the firm had responded not with pushback or questions, just a terse message: we are reviewing your proposal internally. Please stand by. Internally, they weren't reviewing anything. They were panicking because the board had finally been fully briefed and the mood was apocalyptic. No compliance reporting, no payroll processing, no product deployments, vendors threatening to pull contracts, partners suspending operations, and the whispers, the kind of whispers that leak to industry blogs and make investors nervous, had already begun. By 9:02, Brandon had been placed on administrative leave. The email was phrased as a sabbatical for personal reasons, but nobody who saw him clearing out his office believed he'd ever return. He didn't make eye contact with anyone, didn't try to maintain dignity, just stuffed his belongings into a cardboard box and left through the side exit without speaking to a single person. I had become a ghost in that building, a name spoken in hushed tones, a legend whose absence had caused more damage than any action I could have ever taken. At 9:34, the interim chief operating officer convened an emergency board session. At 9:58, the vote was unanimous: accept her terms in full. But there was one small problem. I hadn't answered my phone, hadn't responded to their messages, hadn't acknowledged the well-dressed lawyer standing outside my building, because I wasn't interested in begging. I wasn't interested in making anyone comfortable. For the first time in my entire career, I held the one position every executive fantasizes about: complete, absolute, unshakable leverage, and I wanted them to feel what that meant. I opened my email at 10:17 a.m. to find 19 unread messages, including one from legal, with the subject: Re-Infrastructure Restoration Agreement accepted with minor modifications for mutual review. I didn't even open it. I simply replied: no modifications, no mutual review. I wrote it once and I won't write it again. You have until noon. Then I closed my laptop, made myself another cup of tea, watered my plants, and sat down with a book I'd been meaning to read for months. At 11:53 a.m., 7 minutes before my deadline, the final email arrived. Fully executed agreement attached, all terms accepted as written, payment processed to your designated account, formal apology attached per your specifications, system access credentials restored under the terms outlined. Your consulting engagement begins at your discretion. No celebration, no fist pump, no dramatic moment of vindication. I just logged into the system, navigated through the familiar interfaces I'd built over 14 years, and with 3 clicks, I restored the scheduler, reactivated the authentication heartbeat, and released every frozen job from its digital holding pattern. It took 8 minutes. The logs began flowing again, like blood returning to a limb that had fallen asleep. Painless, clinical, alive, but I didn't add my name. back into the system as the permanent administrator, didn't position myself as the hero riding in to save the day. Instead, I queued up the permanent deletion of my own administrative credentials, one by one, until the final screen read, "Administrator to be assigned none." I left them one final comment in the system logs. "You don't need me anymore. You just need to respect what you rely on and the people who build it." Then I clicked confirm. My screen went dark. I closed the laptop, stood up, and carefully placed the signed consulting contract into a folder beside that old framed certificate, the one from 2016, in recognition of outstanding infrastructure contributions. The year nobody remembered because everything had worked perfectly. The contract was real, 7 figures, no non-compete clause, 6 months of work if I chose to accept it, but I didn't sign it for the money. I signed it to make the ending official, to close this chapter on my terms, not theirs. And then, because I'm thorough, I got dressed, drove to the office, and took the elevator to the executive floor. The corridor was eerily quiet, stripped of its usual buzz of self-importance. I walked past the reception desk, through the glass hallway, and stopped outside what used to be Brandon's office. Empty, desk cleared, monitor gone. Just a faint impression in the carpet where his chair used to sit, like even the furniture was tired of supporting his weight. I looked through the glass for a long moment. No triumph, no revenge fantasies playing out in my head, just closure. The sound of my shoes on the polished floor echoed as I turned and walked toward the elevator. On my way out, the new interim CTO, a woman named Sarah, who'd been promoted from within, someone who'd actually worked her way up through engineering, caught sight of me in the hallway. She opened her mouth to speak, hesitated, then simply nodded with what looked like respect. I nodded back. That was enough. I didn't need applause, didn't need a farewell party or a LinkedIn post celebrating my contributions. I had something far more valuable than recognition. I had proof that the foundation they'd overlooked had held everything together. And the moment I stepped back, the entire structure showed its cracks. That's the thing about quiet power. You never see it coming until it's already gone. And by then, it's too late to apologize your way out of it. As I stepped out into the afternoon sunlight, phone still off, bag light, shoulders relaxed in a way they hadn't been in years, I whispered something to myself, to the memory of Brandon and every executive like him who'd ever mistaken silence for weakness. "Fix your tone," I said quietly, smiling. "Sure, I'll fix yours first." I drove home slowly, taking side streets instead of the highway, listening to music instead of NPR, feeling something I hadn't felt in over a decade. Lightness. Not happiness exactly, not yet, but the absence of weight. The absence of being responsible for everything while being valued for nothing. My apartment looked different when I walked in, brighter somehow, even though nothing had changed. Same furniture, same plants, same framed certificate on the wall that I'd probably throw out eventually. But the air felt different. I made dinner, actual dinner, not microwaved leftovers or takeout eaten standing up at the counter while monitoring system alerts. I sat down at my table, poured myself a glass of wine, and ate slowly, tasting every bite, present in my own life for the first time in years. Over the next few weeks, I watched from a distance as Meridian Tech scrambled to rebuild what they'd taken for granted. They hired 3 new senior architects, none of whom stayed longer than 2 months once they saw the state of the infrastructure. They brought in consulting firms who charged them twice what they'd paid me to essentially document what I'd already built. They held town halls about the importance of knowledge transfer and succession planning, buzzwords that meant nothing because the culture hadn't changed, just the vocabulary. Sarah, the new CTO, reached out to me twice. Not demanding, not entitled, just asking if I'd be willing to consult on a few specific technical questions. I responded once politely with a detailed answer that solved her immediate problem. Then I added a line at the end. "This is a courtesy, not a precedent. Moving forward, you'll need to build your own institutional knowledge." She replied with a simple thank you and never asked again. I respected that. Brandon, From what I heard through the industry grapevine, landed at a smaller startup 6 months later with a significantly less impressive title. I didn't follow his career, didn't need to. He'd already taught me everything I needed to know about what happens when ego writes checks that competence can't cash. As for me, I didn't take the consulting contract, not right away. I let it sit for 2 weeks, unsigned, while I thought about what I actually wanted. And what I realized was that I didn't want to go back. Not even as a highly paid consultant, not even with all the power and leverage in the world. I wanted to build something new, something mine, something where I'd never again have to wonder if my contributions mattered. So I started my own consulting practice, small, selective, working only with companies that valued infrastructure as much as innovation, that understood the difference between building systems and maintaining them. Word spread quietly through professional networks. Within 3 months, I had more offers than I could accept. Within 6 months, I was earning more than I ever had at Meridian, working half the hours and sleeping through the night for the first time in a decade. I hired 2 junior engineers, both women, both overlooked by their previous employers despite being brilliant. I paid them well, taught them everything I knew, and made sure their names were on every system they built. No invisible labor, no silent heroics, just credit where credit was due. Sometimes late at night, I'd think about that moment when I saw Brandon's threat on my screen, that smug message about fixing my tone or losing my bonus, and I'd smile, not with bitterness, but with something like gratitude, because that message had been the push I needed to finally value myself the way I'd always deserved to be valued. He'd meant it as a threat. Instead, he'd given me permission to stop carrying weight for people who never say thank you. The best revenge wasn't destruction. It was walking away and building something better, proving that the problem was never my competence. It was their inability to recognize it. One afternoon, almost a year after I'd left, I received a LinkedIn message from someone at Meridian, a mid-level engineer I'd mentored years ago. The message was short, just wanted to say thank you. We finally understand what you were holding together, and I'm sorry it took losing you for us to see it. I didn't reply immediately. I let it sit for a day, thinking about what to say, how to respond to an apology that came too late to change anything but still meant something. Finally, I wrote back. Thank you for saying that. I appreciate it more than you know. Keep building things that matter and make sure the people doing the invisible work get seen. That's all. No lecture, no bitterness, just a reminder that the lesson wasn't about me. It was about how we treat the people who hold everything together. And as I closed my laptop that evening, sitting in my home office with warm light filtering through the windows and classical music playing softly in the background, I realized something profound. I'd spent 14 years trying to prove I was valuable to people who'd already decided I was invisible, and the moment I stopped trying to prove anything, the moment I simply stepped back and let the truth reveal itself, everything changed. Not because I'd destroyed anything, not because I'd gotten revenge in some dramatic, cinematic way, but because I'd finally understood that my power didn't come from being indispensable to them. It came from being essential to myself, from knowing my worth even when nobody else did, from walking away when staying would have cost me more than leaving. This is Revenge Stories with Michelle, a home for quiet courage and true endings. If you feel my words, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your voice matters here. Your story matters too. Because here's what I learned, and here's what I want you to know if you're listening to this and seeing yourself in my story. You don't have to burn bridges to prove your worth. You don't have to sabotage anyone to show them what they've lost. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply stop carrying the weight and let them feel how heavy it really was. Let them scramble. Let them panic. Let them realize too late that the foundation they built their empire on wasn't the technology, it was you. And when they finally understand that, when they come back with apologies and offers and promises of change, you'll have a choice. You can go back on your terms with the respect and compensation you always deserved. Or you can do what I did. You can walk away completely and build something new, something better, something where you'll never again have to prove you matter because it's built on the foundation of people who already know you do. The truth is, I don't know if Brandon ever really understood what happened. I don't know if he ever connected the dots between his late night threat and the company wide crisis that followed. Part of me hopes he did. Part of me hopes he lies awake sometimes thinking about that moment, wondering what would have happened if he just treated me with basic respect, if he'd said thank you instead of fix your tone. But honestly, it doesn't matter anymore. His understanding or lack thereof doesn't define my story. What defines it is this: I was underestimated, undervalued, and threatened. And instead of accepting that as my reality, I let the truth speak for itself. I let the systems I'd built show everyone exactly what I'd been contributing all along. I didn't need to explain. I didn't need to defend myself. I just needed to step back and let the absence do the talking, and it spoke volumes. So if you're in a job right now where you feel invisible, where your contributions go unnoticed, where someone like Brandon is telling you to fix your tone while they ignore your expertise, I want you to know something. You're not crazy. You're not difficult. You're not the problem. You're just surrounded by people who've built their success on your invisible labor, and they're terrified of what happens when you stop providing it. Document everything, know your worth, understand your leverage, and when the time comes, when they finally push you too far, don't explode, don't burn out, don't give them the satisfaction of watching you break. Just step back, close the door quietly, and let them try to function without you. You might be surprised how quickly they realize what you were worth, and by then you'll be long gone, building something better, something that actually values you from the start. That's not revenge. That's justice. That's power. That's knowing that the best way to prove you were holding everything together is to stop holding it and watch what falls. They'll call it sabotage. They'll call it abandonment. They'll call it whatever they need to call it to avoid admitting the truth that they took you for granted and paid the price. But you'll know better. You'll know that you didn't break anything. You just stopped fixing everything. And sometimes that's all it takes. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here, for understanding that not all revenge is loud, that not all power is visible, that sometimes the quietest exits leave the loudest echoes. This is Revenge Stories with Michelle, a home for quiet courage and true endings. If you feel my words, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your voice matters here. Your story matters too. And remember, you don't have to burn the building down to prove it was built on your back. Sometimes you just have to walk away and let them try to hold it up themselves. That's when they finally understand what you were carrying all along. Until next time, know your worth, document your value, and never let anyone make you feel small for being the foundation they took for granted. You're not invisible. You're just surrounded by people who refuse to look. And that says everything about them and nothing about you.